Hey everyone, John TheMorgile here, checking in for a new static plane Earth video for you. Hope you do enjoy it. There will be some speculation within this video, but only in an attempt to better understand the natural world and how its dynamic systems actually work. Recently watching one of Nathan Oakley's debates, I was compelled to revisit a scientific topic regarding the natural laws of thermodynamics, and as well as specifically the pseudoscience involved with the kinetic theory of gases, developed in the 1800s by James Clerk Maxwell and Ludwig Boltzmann. I'm just going to read a bit from Britannica.com, link in the descripts, to describe the kinetic theory of gases and how it originated. Okay, so the kinetic theory of gases theory based on a simplified molecular or particle description of a gas from which many gross properties of the gas can be derived. The British scientist James Clerk Maxwell and the Austrian physicist Ludwig Boltzmann in the 19th century led in establishing the theory, which became one of the most important concepts in modern scientism. The simplest kinetic model is based on the assumptions that 1. The gas is composed of a large number of identical molecules moving in random directions, separated by distances that are very large compared with their size, and 2. The molecules undergo perfectly elastic collisions, or collisions with no energy loss, with each other and with the walls of its container, but otherwise do not interact. And 3. The transfer of kinetic energy between molecules is heat. These simplifying assumptions bring the characteristics of gases within the range of mathematical treatment. Sound familiar? Such a model describes a perfect gas and is a reasonable approximation to a real gas, particularly in the limit of extreme dilution and high temperature. Such a simplified description, however, is not sufficiently precise to account for the behavior of gases in high densities. Based on the kinetic theory, pressure on the container walls can be quantitatively attributed to random collisions of molecules, the average energy of which depends on the gas temperature. The gas pressure can therefore be related directly to temperature and density. Many other gross properties of the gas can be derived, such as viscosity, thermal and electric conductivity, diffusion, heat capacity, and mobility. In order to explain observed deviations from perfect gas behavior, such as condensation, the assumptions must be appropriately modified. In doing so, considerable insight has been gained as to the nature of molecular dynamics and interactions. So, of course, some of that I do agree with, like, the pressure and temperature being directly related to the density and blah, blah, blah. But, of course, there are bits and pieces of that I wholeheartedly disagree with. So I should mention first that the concept of atoms and molecules is theoretical pseudoscience, in my opinion. Therefore, the kinetic theory of gases as a whole is, by direct extension, necessarily also pseudoscience, as it pre-requires the existence of atoms and molecules in the gases. While flat earth cavaliers like Nathan Oakley are certainly intelligent, open-minded, and apply a healthy skepticism towards the claims of science, they somehow still adhere to concepts involved with pseudoscientific theories akin to the kinetic theory of gases. And this is not an attack against Nathan or his panel members, but is instead a call to arms for flat earth researchers to look into the theory of gases as described and to try to develop more sound theories to describe what exactly is going on with the gases. I tend to abandon the idea that the theorists of the 1800s, like Cavendish et al., who carved their assumptions in scientific stone, were somehow superior to us in any way. Especially considering our technology and ability to work out problems as a group as large as the internet will support, puts us in a position to better flesh out the nuts and bolts of reality than the egotistical globetards of yesteryear. They developed theories based on observation, which was then described by mathematics in order to understand and predict natural occurrences and behavior. Then they taught their theories as fact and pointed to the math as proof of the theory, which is exactly what pseudoscience looks like. Just because they call something a scientific fact and the numbers work doesn't make it the truth. So let's start by summarizing the accepted theory of gases involving tiny particles of gas which, according to the law of entropy, expand to fill their available container, and they cause a measurable pressure. So far so good. The problem that I have with the theory begins when these tiny particles are claimed to be traveling at hundreds or even thousands of miles per hour within said container, bouncing off one another without energy loss, and bouncing off the walls of the container, again without energy loss, described as perfectly elastic collisions. This is pretty far-fetched as far as I'm concerned, but since it's taught in all science books, then we're forced to accept it as the scientific truth. While gas is completely different than solid matter, the standard theory essentially purports the particles of gas to be tiny physical solid chunks of matter hauling ass within their container, haphazardly bouncing around, so unbonded. What if a particle of water vapor is altogether different than a particle of ice? Not just more tightly compacted and more slowly moving, but something altogether different. When the conditions are right to phase the water into the next form, then the water, theoretically here, undergoes some fundamental change. Now, we're not talking about a molecule of H2O that merely becomes more compressed and slower moving, but a particle vibrating at different harmonic resonance frequencies depending on pressure and temperature in order to define its current state. Liquid water is vibrating at a different resonance frequency than water vapor, while solid ice is different than that still, according to this sort of postulation that I'm throwing out here. If you light a cigarette and blow a smoke ring, the gases and particulates forming the ring really don't seem to be traveling within the medium at very high velocities. And if you physically touch a smoke ring, you don't feel anything. Surely, if the particulates within the smoke ring were actually bouncing around at hundreds or thousands of miles an hour, should we not expect the smoke ring to we should not expect the smoke ring to hold form, for the particles on the outer edge of the smoke ring would, you'd think that they would fly off in all directions at very high velocities, but there is a sort of surface tension to the ring instead. It tends to stick together as opposed to immediately expanding out into the ether. Anyways, we'd surely expect to detect the smoke ring with our sense of touch, like if you run your hand through it or if a smoke ring hits you in the eye. Sure, the smoke might burn a little bit, but you don't actually feel it hit you. And you might expect that sort of thing to happen if you had super high velocity particles racing around in that ring of smoke. I personally find it very hard to believe that said unbonded gas particles are bouncing around, say, inside a balloon at hundreds of miles per hour and retain 100% of the energy after 10 collisions or 10,000 collisions perpetually, assuming all other variables like temperature and pressure remain unaltered. This to me is beyond absurd and is just wholly unbelievable. For starters, nobody has ever imaged or directly observed an atom or a molecule of gas, so to claim that they are particles traveling at super high velocities, bouncing off one another, is very hard to swallow. So, of course, they do have measurable pressure, and to describe that, the theorists of the 1800s claimed that the pressure was these little collisions of these tiny particles striking the walls of the container, although such a concept cannot really be proven to be happening in reality. Furthermore, natural laws demand that an object in motion will lose velocity whenever outside forces are applied. To claim that gas particles are in perpetual motion, not beholden to such physical laws, is very difficult to swallow. So, different laws of physics are written for the micro and the macro levels. However, reality might be more homogeneous than that. But since a pressurized container will maintain its pressure and will not slowly lose pressure over time, again assuming all variables remain constant in a perfectly controlled container, this anecdotally supports the theory, but it falls short of proving perfectly elastic collisions wherein the gas particles retain all their original energy and velocity perpetually to infinity, much like the claims involved with the speed of light. And I'll put a card here for a video I did a while back, basically exposing the speed of light as more pseudoscience from its very origins. One would expect to feel something when passing their hand through, say, a smoke ring or even a ray of light, as in the case of the smoke ring, the little particles of gases are claimed to be traveling at hundreds of miles an hour when they hit an object, and in the case of light, the alleged photons are traveling, well, at the speed of light. They crash by. So, if given the choice, for example, between a 10-ton object striking you at 1 mile per hour and a 1-pound object striking you at, say, 20,000 miles an hour, surely we'd all choose the former, since force increases with high velocities at an increased rate compared to increasing the mass. Again, we'd expect a ray of light hitting you in the eye to exert a force equivalent to its mass multiplied by its velocity, and at that speed you might expect it to physically hurt when it pings your eye, or at least be physically measurable in terms of a force exerted by a photon hitting you at the speed of light, when in reality that simply isn't the case. According to this theory, just sitting down in the troposphere, we're constantly being bombarded by atoms and molecules of various gases and particulates hitting our skin at hundreds of miles an hour all day long, and yet we never sense these collisions on our skin, nor can we measure these collisions with any instrumentation, unless, of course, you conflate the pressure to being a measurement of these collisions, which I think, we can't do that. We can't take the theory of pressure being a measurement of the collisions as proof of the collisions, right? I mean, again, if a gnat were to fly into your face at 500 miles an hour, I'm pretty sure you'd feel it, right? So if something half the size or a quarter of the size of the gnat was to hit you at 2,000 miles an hour, I mean, you'd think you'd feel it. So what exactly are gases, and how do we explain their behaviors if these ancient scientism pontificates were wrong? Well, when it comes to water, water's unique. We see the solid, liquid, and gas forms naturally in nature in the water cycle of evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. Again, this makes water unique of all the other elements, being the only substance which displays all three states of matter naturally in the world. The water cycle is then applied to all types of materials, the entire periodic table, liquids and gases ubiquitously, asserting that every other type of substance must behave similarly to water, given the necessary conditions, of course, although we only experience all three phases naturally with water. Now, I say this tongue-in-cheek, but I've never seen wood boiled down into a liquid. When you burn a log, it certainly gives off smoke, but it doesn't boil into a liquid. But that smoke will never condense back down and reform into wood naturally. And of course, I've never seen a puddle of wood. And so, in many respects, water is unique among other types of materials because it goes through these cycles without losing its integrity. And of course, I understand that a chunk of wood is different than water. They claim that all matter has three states: solid, liquid, and gas. And of course, wood is wood in the solid form. Then you burn it, it turns to gas, but it's never going to reconstitute back into wood. And of course, you're never going to have a puddle of wood. So the point here I'm making is that water is unique in many respects. Now, a question addressed towards the globetards. How, globetards, is it possible to have a pressurized world while space is claimed by you to be a vacuum? 10 to the negative 17 torr vacuum, which is extremely powerful vacuum, without some type of container to separate the pressurized world from the extremely high vacuum of space. Now, the globetards claim that gases are compelled to stay near the Earth due to gravity. However, gases in nature tend to defy gravity. They move up and away from the Earth on their own volition, expanding away from the Earth in spite of gravity. So how can gases be said to be accelerating down at 9.8 meters per second squared if they are in fact moving up and away from the Earth naturally? If the world was actually a sphere in space, the gases which are naturally compelled to expand and fill their available container in spite of gravity simply cannot be said to be held to the Earth in response to gravity, the same force. Certainly not when presented with an eventual very high vacuum at the uppermost levels beyond the troposphere. Again, the alleged vacuum of space is claimed to be an extremely powerful vacuum, which is infinitely powerful the alleged acceleration of gravity. Gravity, which the gases ignore and violate as a rule by their very nature. Furthermore, gravity's effect on gases would be greatest near the ground, and proportionally less powerful at higher altitudes, since the Standard Model claims gravity to be inversely related to the distance between two objects. So if gases openly and easily violate gravity near the ground, they would be less prone to obey gravity at higher altitudes, even without the alleged vacuum of space beckoning them to expand further out. Gases would be more prone to defy gravity at higher altitudes, but somehow we're told that they behave as a sort of cork on the top of the atmosphere, preventing the vacuum of space from accepting their indefinite natural expansion. So the claim that the gases at lower altitudes are being held in place, gases above them, sort of pushing down upon them, is a violation of logic, for gases simply do not fall towards the earth in response to gravity. Gases do not fall down, gases do not go boom boom, but instead they expand away from the earth in defiance of gravity. Clouds of water vapor in the sky remain aloft until enough water condenses within the cloud to find its way back down in the form of liquid water, or solid hail, or crystalline snow, but the gaseous form of water certainly does not find its way down towards the ground. Now, of course, we can't rightfully claim that the gases over our head are resting upon the ground either and supporting the gases above them. They are instead suspended in their natural elevation of equilibrium in spite of gravity, possibly in response to their harmonic resonance frequency aligning to their elevation by the Earth's magnetic resonance field corresponding to that elevation. Again, we're going in the realm of theory a bit here, but I'm postulating. So if we're to see a major change in the Earth's magnetic field, say, for example, a pole reversal or a violent flux in the field's intensity at various altitudes, we might see a corresponding change of the altitude of equilibrium for gases in the ionosphere in response to the change in the field. If you put a glass of water in a vacuum chamber, the water will start to boil at room temperature. If the Earth's magnetic field and related harmonic resonance frequencies weakened, it's possible that the world's oceans would begin to boil, creating more water vapor, thus increasing the barometric pressure, leaving a lower sea level as the new normal state of equilibrium, hypothetically, of course. We can all agree that you simply cannot have a pressurized system adjacent to a vacuum, as the gases within the pressurized area will naturally expand to fill their available container. This point alone proves the heliocentric model fails to align to observable reality, since we do indeed have a pressurized environment, and the Standard Model claims that the world is housed within a super high vacuum. This is not necessarily to claim that we have a container in the sky, and perhaps we do, but on the other hand, it's just as easy to consider the possibility that there is not a super intense vacuum beyond some 60 miles in altitude. The highest altitude which any citizen can realistically study is up to the level of helium weather balloons, so about 20 miles up. Beyond that, we are completely reliant upon data gleaned from the world's space agencies, whom we already know have been lying about everything since day one, so we can't really trust their figures. Now, I won't claim to know what is beyond the heavens or higher than even 20 miles, but we certainly know that it could not be an infinite vacuum, as claimed by mainstream science, since that theory is a direct extension of the ball Earth theory. Since we have a pressurized environment, then we necessarily have some degree of containment, but who's to say exactly what that looks like or the mechanics of the containment? If the sky isn't capped off by a vacuum at all, then a physical dome in the sky which is based on the ground is simply unnecessary in theory. Standard theoretical science claims that infinite space is 10 to the negative 17 torr. A vacuum powerful, we can't even dream of recreating such a lack of stuff in the labs. The truth is, the natural order of things here on the ground in reality is to have stuff fill space, and as much as we might fight to remove all the stuff from an enclosed area, nature demands that some stuff exist in that place, and it will fight to enforce that rule. Space does not like to be in lack of stuff filling it. Whether this is caused by, again, the natural harmonic resonance frequency of matter simply obeying its natural assignment according to the fields emanating from the Earth, or maybe something else, we do know that the ambient atmosphere at ground level is extremely violent to sealed containers, which are evacuated of the normal amount of stuff within. The ambient gases near sea level push in at all directions at 14.7 pounds per square inch. This is measurable. The higher in altitude you go, the pressure indeed decreases proportionally. However, this is not to say this decrease continues in a linear fashion until a vacuum is eventually reached. For all we know, it's possible that at some point high above our ability to reach, the pressure gradient inverts and pressure increases proportionally with even higher elevations. I mean, who's to say? It could stand to reason that such an inversion in the density gradient could support crystalline states of hydrogen or helium at given altitudes. Again, this could be dictated by the Earth's harmonic resonance field designation at that level. Since we do have meteor showers sometimes in reality, we see shooting stars sometimes, we know that there appear to be physical solid objects high in altitude. This suggests that there is some layer of solid state matter high above the traversable altitudes. The fact of the matter remains, the globe Earth theory is completely in violation of many immutable laws of nature and physics, specifically the one regarding the vacuum of space adjacent to our pressurized environment. Instead of conceding that the pressurized world cannot exist adjacent to the vacuum of space, globe Earth proponents instead will dance around the subject and point to the pressure gradient or the pressure delta in order to explain this away. They'll say things like, well, since we have a higher pressure towards the ground and lower pressure in the sky, the gradient of pressure allows us to incrementally fizzle out to an eventual vacuum in space at some point beyond the Kármán line around 60 miles in altitude or thereabouts. This is completely ignoring the problem, dancing around the point that we indeed have a pressurized system to begin with, which is only possible within a contained area, assuming the world existed within an infinite vacuum. If it weren't for NASA claiming to have gone into space and confirmed the vacuum environment up there, they might have some wiggle room to operate within when it comes to this allegations of vacuums up there. But the ball Earth theory demands that space be a vacuum, and the only explanation they have involves gravity, somehow forcing gases to remain within our system, defying their very nature of gases to expand to fill their available container. Again, gases defy gravity as a rule, even near the ground. To assume they would somehow obey gravity at high altitudes nearer the vacuum is madness. The sleight of hand involving a gradient somehow solving this issue for the globe is avoiding the primary issue at hand, for you first must explain the pressurized system, which we do indeed have, before you can start citing pressure gradients as the mechanics of containing the pressurized area. The absurd claim here by Team Globetard is that since we have a gradient, the vacuum of space can't exist adjacent to the upper atmosphere, because gravity creates a situation where incrementally lower pressure layers slowly blend into the Kármán line. They claim that they do not have a pressurized environment adjacent to the vacuum, but instead they have a relatively low pressure environment adjacent to the atmosphere, somehow suggesting low pressure gases are containing the pressurized area beneath them, violating the second law of thermodynamics as well as the natural law of entropy. Not to mention attributing behavior to gravity which is not claimed in any other capacity. Unfortunately, if the ball Earth theory were correct, we would simply have no atmosphere whatever, for the vacuum of space would gobble up the topmost layer first, then the layer beneath that, and then the one below that, until we had no atmosphere at all. Then the oceans would begin to boil due to the lack of barometric pressure, then those vapors would escape to fill the void of space in all directions, and space can really only support bonded solids, not amorphous clouds or nebulae or gaseous rings around wandering stars or any of that. They will claim that you can indeed have a pressurized system adjacent to a vacuum without a solid barrier too, for we observe density gradients in the atmosphere without barriers between each layer. The pressure near the ground is greater than the pressure at, say, 30,000 feet, and there's no barrier between those two areas. Since a vacuum is defined technically as a relatively lower pressure area, they claim this is proof of concept for the uppermost layer adjacent to the vacuum. Of course, the area at 30,000 feet is still a pressurized area, not a super high vacuum. And of course, this is completely ignoring the fact that we have pressure to begin with, something that is not possible to achieve in the first place within the alleged vacuum of space out there, especially since the infinite space is said to be such a super high-powered vacuum looming above the Kármán line. The air near the ground is water vapor, carbon dioxide, and other particulates, so the lower pressure at 30,000 feet not just due to lower density, but lower variety of matter at that level. You could argue in circles with die-hard globetards to infinity, and at some point go mad for the futility of it all, for they operate from a position of anti-logic. Instead of logically considering this topic, they begin with the unshakable, unquestionable axiom in the spinning ball Earth, and rearrange all facts and evidence to conform with their belief, even when it is logically repulsive and in violation of the laws of nature to do so. Instead of considering their belief system as wrong, or even potentially wrong, they will maintain their belief system and invent illogical apologies to preserve the system in spite of the evidence which defies it. Again, this is the opposite of logic and the opposite of science. Really, the spirit of the scientific method is to try to debunk standing theories, question everything, and apply the same levels of skepticism towards all topics. To hold a belief and simply refuse to question that belief is the opposite of science. Furthermore, to refuse to consider alternate hypothesis is the opposite of science. Anyway, considering the fact that I believe our entire model of what exactly matter and gases are is that wrong, this may be the reason that we have had a difficult time perfectly closing the discussion here for good. If it turns out that gases are not actually little molecules or atoms bouncing around at super high velocities, but are instead a vibrational state of matter which has harmonized with their respective assigned area based on the natural resonance frequencies generated by the Earth, then we really don't need a container to explain our pressurized system. If the world naturally assigns a certain type of matter to exist near the ground, and gradually less dense types of matter to exist at higher altitudes, then gravity has nothing to do with it, and relative density is an effect of natural forces. Perhaps these assignments have nothing to do with density or atomic weight, whatever, but the vibrational state of the matter harmonizing with the resonance field's designation for that altitude. Once you reach a certain height altitude, the Earth's field ceases to assign matter beyond that level, and so matter simply fails to coalesce there. Perhaps the Sun is a conglomeration of a variety of matter which has been naturally designated to entail a large amount of energy compressed into a relatively small area, giving off light and energy and radiation, perhaps comprised of hydrogen, nitrogen, and other such elements in an excited state or an ionized state. It is not out of the question to be completely accustomed to dealing with here on the ground without the need for atomic theory or hot atomic fusion going on in the Sun. We do know that the Sun is local and relatively small, certainly is not some 900,000 miles in diameter, some 90 million miles away. It's relatively local, relatively small for sure, since we know that atoms, or I believe atoms, don't actually exist, then the whole concept of atomic fusion is a bunch of malarkey. It seems that time may not be a factor, at any rate in the heavenly realms, for no discernible changes have ever taken place among the stars for the entire duration of human history, for one. Perhaps time is yet another feature that is exclusive to the physical plane, which is dictated by dynamic vibrational action created within the Earth system itself. Here in the high-density realm, time might be a byproduct of operating within this matrix, whereas the higher elevation heavens are far enough removed from the high density physical area where time no longer applies potentially. Stars are really the only objects which change relative position within the heavens, and of course they operate in cycles which repeat endlessly without any discernible motive power, in a state of perpetual motion without any sign of path loss or deceleration. And of course the stars themselves have never changed positions relative to one another, suggesting they might actually exist beyond the effects of time. The heavens are permanent and beyond the physical constraints of time which we operate within here on the physical plane, perhaps. Maybe our spirit operates on a higher plane beyond the construct of matter and time, which is our relationship to the Creator who made us in His image. Since the spirit operates within the body, it is the body that experiences or is affected by time, while the spirit perhaps is everlasting, not affected by time. Now I'm speculating here, but it is reasonable to assume that when gases like helium and hydrogen find their level of equilibrium, they behave in completely foreign and unpredictable manners, especially when electrically charged or in crystalline state. For example, what if completely unknown states of matter are formed at these levels, beyond our ability to recreate down here in the troposphere, at the extremely low pressure and low temperatures found at very high altitudes? It's truly anybody's guess how these gases will behave at low pressures and temperatures, electrically charged, crystalline, etc. The sun behaves unlike anything we can point to here on the ground, to be sure. So there is anecdotal evidence to support this theory, which is to say the heavens are not beholden to the physical rules which we are familiar with here on the physical plane. Meteor showers can often be viewed where bright objects are seen fallen from the sky, which always seem to fizzle out and evaporate before they reach the ground. If these were rocky bits of errant asteroids as claimed by Lions, it's hard to imagine solid rocks igniting on fire and evaporating as a result of merely traveling through thin air. Can you imagine trying to accelerate a rock so fast as to ignite it as a result of traveling through thin layers of gases? Now, we've been conditioned to accept this concept by NASA's re-entry vehicle propaganda, but I can't find evidence of demonstrating a solid rock catching fire and evaporating into nothing as a result of traveling through thin air. Crystalline hydrogen, on the other hand, could certainly fit that bill, and it makes a lot of sense that a reaction could take place when falling through the ionized layers of the heavens, causing shooting stars and meteor showers that we observe in reality. Mainstream science claims that the high-altitude gases like hydrogen and helium are resting on top of other gases at lower levels, much like the layers of an unshaken vinaigrette. Of course, oil and vinegar are not gases, which naturally expand away from the Earth with a tendency to attempt escaping their unsealed container. Oil and vinegar are beholden to the law of what goes up must come down, while the gases above us actively defy the same law unless contained and tightly sealed. Since we observe phenomena like shooting stars and meteor showers, we know there must be physical, solid objects high above the Earth, supporting the possibility of an inversion of the density gradient at some point in altitude. Instead of rocks, meteors may be crystalline forms of hydrogen and helium and such, precipitating like we see in rainstorms or snowstorms. At the end of the day, I hope this video has caused you to think about what portions of pseudoscience you adhere to and repeat. I could be wrong. Gases could be behaving exactly like Cavendish and all the ancient Lionists claim, and wrote the books and deemed to be facts. Atoms could be miniature heliocentric models making up everything, with protons and neutrons behaving like little suns, and electrons behaving like little planets within all things everywhere, at the smallest levels. Atoms of nitrogen pelting your body all over at thousands of miles per hour right now as we speak, and you don't feel a thing. It's possible. I just hope that we will question these sorts of things in order to better our understanding of reality, and thus better understanding ourselves and our Creator. So that wraps up this video, guys. Thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to support the channel and help me continue on making videos, your contributions are welcomed and appreciated. I'll put links in the description below. Thanks so much for your help, and God bless you. God love.